I'm going to tell you the story. It was a first reading. So this is a strange story where this guy named John, he sees this vision of heaven. Now, seeing heaven is pretty rare. God rarely lets anybody see it because he wants us to make sure that we're doing our work here. But this guy named John, he goes to Mass. And you kind of know that because, he says, it is the Lord's Day. So what day of the week is the Lord's Day? Anybody? Oh, he was quick. You are brilliant. Yes, Sunday. So it's Sunday, and it says that he was taken up in the Spirit. Now, that's really hard for most people to know what that is. In the very, very ancient church, when you said, I was taken up in the Spirit, in modern language, we'd say, if I said I went to Mass, you guys know what I mean, right? So if I said, in the early church, I used to say I was taken up in the Spirit, means that you went to Mass. And he goes to Mass, and he hears this loud voice, as loud as a trumpet, saying, write down what I'm going to show you. And he turns around, and he looks at the lampstand. And the lampstand, if you're wondering where that is, it's in every church. God, in Exodus, asked us to put a lampstand in front of every tabernacle. So that's the red candle over there. So you guys can't see it, but you can see it when you sit down. There's a big red candle, and he turns around and looks at the lampstand. Also, another name for the church building was the lampstand. That's what we would call the building. And he turns around, and there is Christ. And it's Christ. He's wearing this white ankle-long robe, that's what I'm wearing. And he also has this golden sash. That's a stole. He's a high priest. And he shows him heaven. And heaven is, he looks at heaven, and heaven looks a lot, almost exactly, kind of like a huge Mass, except much, much bigger. Much bigger. Where in the center of heaven there's an altar, and on the altar is the Lamb of God, and the Lamb of God, it's the feast of the Lamb of God. And John sees heaven, and there are billions of people all around the altar. Not only billions of people, but there's angels, tons of angels, and the tetramorphs. That's what the four windows are up there. And he looks and, see the four windows up there? Those are the tetramorphs. There's a lot more creatures in heaven than just human beings. But of the billions of people all around the altar, they have one thing in common. All of them were really good at loving. And so John says, it looks a lot like a wedding. It's a Mass, but it looks like this huge wedding. And the reason why God gives us this vision that, wow, at the end of time, everybody gathers together for this huge Mass, this huge wedding. And everybody who is really good at loving, they get to this feast. And the reason why he shows us this vision is that when you go to Mass, when you receive communion, think of it. What we're really doing is practicing for the great feast of the Lamb of God in heaven. This is our practice, where all of us gather together. You know, like if you take up a sport, you have to practice. So before we get to the great feast of love in heaven, we come back week after week to practice, to make sure that we're loving. So when you go to communion, and this is your first time you're going to go to communion, when you go to communion, it's actually making this promise to God. You're making this promise to God that you're going to spend your life trying to love. In the very ancient world, even today, how you make a promise to God is actually by eating and drinking. And today, when you guys have your first communion and feast on the body and blood of Christ, when you eat that, you're making this promise that you're going to try and love as best you can. That's why at the Last Supper, Jesus says, when Jesus gave us the Eucharist, he says, I give you one commandment, one law. What is the one law that Jesus gave at the Last Supper? I think she was quickest. She got it. What was it? To love. And you know what the amazing part is? Some of the apostles, they didn't get that just you have to love. So Jesus says, all right. So he takes off his outer garment, puts on a towel, and he washes all their feet. washing feet. And he says, this is what love does. If you have communion, if you take communion, then your life is a service of love. Just like everybody gathered at the great feast of heaven, they're all really good at loving. So we come back week after week after week, and the Eucharist is like a compass. You know how, like if you have a compass, it always points north? So let's say you're hiking somewhere and you want to find out where to go. You take a compass, and it'll point you on what direction to go. The Eucharist is like a compass, where we come back week after week after week to say, you know, I could be more loving in this area. I could be better at loving in this area. So that after a lifetime, our lives are truly pointed to the great feast where all those who are really good at loving end up. And so, to be honest, I want you to take your first communion very serious. You're making this commitment. When you receive communion, you're going to eat the body and blood of Christ, and your vow to God is that you'll become better and better at loving, that you'll spend your life trying to love as best you can. And the odd part is, when you guys were all babies, your parents, when you were baptized, they made that promise to God for you. That the priest, when you guys were baptized, would say to your parents, do you promise to teach them the way of Christ by loving God and our neighbor? And they said yes. But today, you're making that vow. The same way like at a wedding. At a wedding, you make vows, right? You stand up and you make vows to love somebody. You guys, like some of you guys are dressed in these white dresses. That's because, you know, you get dressed up on your wedding day because you're going to make vows to God. You guys are making vows to God that you will try and love God and everybody. That's your promise. So the same way your parents promised it when you were babies, now today, you're making that promise. So here's a question. Why didn't we have you guys have your first communion like 4 years ago or 5 years ago? Wow, you are really quick, but let's go with over there. Good job. You didn't understand. Now you guys are 8 years old. You're smart enough. You guys kind of understand. No, I know what this means. I'm making a promise. If you're really small, you wouldn't know that, wow, you're making this vow to God to love. So, what we're going to do now is we'll stand up and everybody will renew their baptismal promises. And then after that, we'll have Mass as normal. You'll make your first communion, but I beg you, take it serious. So after a lifetime of eating the body and blood of Christ, making vows to love as best you can, where we end up is at the great feast of all love, which is heaven. So I tell you what, let's stand up, go back to your chairs, and we'll renew our baptismal promises.